Everyone, and welcome to Eteachers and Yearwood's webinar on how to manage during a crisis, ultimately looking to assist head teachers during this pandemic. First of all, thank you ever so much for all of you who have registered to this and obviously are participating. My name, just to kick things off, my name is Dylan Lees-Jones and I'm the Head of Marketing for Eteach. On my slide that some of you might have seen at the very beginning, we'll just go down to that. I'm just going to sort of bring up the agenda, but before I go through the agenda, I just wanted to start off with some housekeeping. We're just going to keep this first of a series of webinars down to about 40 minutes. There are obviously some areas that we've addressed already prior to this with questions that have been sent in, and then there will be an opportunity for all of you to send questions during this webinar. So you will notice on your webinar functionality that you can send through the chat facility any questions, and we can leave those to the end. So moving forward, in terms of the agenda, as I've mentioned, I've done the welcomes and introductions. We're then going to be handing over to sort of Reese, where we can just start talking about his role as Managing Director for Eteach. Then we will be talking to Yearwood Education Partners Tony Makowski and Eamon Whelan, who will be talking through some of the questions that we've received and some of the suitable answers for that. And then we will be looking addressing some of those questions that have come through during this webinar. So if I may, if I could just sort of start with Reese, please. So Reese, for those people who don't know who Eteach are, I was wondering if you could just maybe possibly sum up in a couple of sentences a little bit more about what Eteach do and how they might be able to help schools.
Sure thing. Okay, thanks, Dylan. And just checking, you can all hear me okay? Is that okay?
They can't respond, so you'll be well.
No, but the panel. So yeah, to summarise, Eteach, in essence, we are the online recruitment experts. What we specialise in is online digital advertising through our platform, eteach.com. That's fully supported then by a intelligent suite of recruitment software that we also provide to schools. And the other sort of pillar of Eteach is then the specialist recruitment. So we have a team of knowledgeable experts that are mainly focused on the perm market and long terms. So those are the services that Eteach bring to schools and colleges throughout the UK and internationally.
That's perfect. And in terms of Reese, in terms of sort of how COVID-19 has affected candidate behaviour, what are some of the things that you've picked up on that over the past sort of 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting month, actually, Dylan. It's what we are seeing is that the candidate or job seeker numbers have actually lowered across the board, and whether this is because there's a lot of uncertainty, people just aren't sure what the process is with regards to applying for jobs. That's being mirrored by the actual job number count as well. Schools are, again, have been seen to freeze jobs and put them on hold for the moment. So in terms of candidate behaviour, we're definitely seeing lower numbers. However, looking at the Eteach database and the stats we're getting through the site, the actual number of application rates has stayed quite consistent. So what I think this tells us is that the passive job market, I think, has almost taken a bit of a back seat from browsing and applying to jobs. We've got a very core and small amount of active job seekers still out there sort of pressing ahead. I think we can all take from that there's a level of confidence in the market that September will see schools reopen. The jobs people are applying for and the numbers we're seeing are focused on those September roles. But yeah, we'd definitely say that the active job seeker market, while it's shrunk, is still very active in terms of sending job applications in. And one thing we're sort of seeing and theorizing as why this could have been is that there's been a shift in the market from a lot of the supply teachers who are now, I think, learning that the career as a supply teacher is quite unpredictable and maybe not as secure as some would like. So we're definitely seeing a transition from a lot of supply teachers now looking at permanent opportunities for September. So as they've joined the market here, those are definitely the numbers we're seeing inflate maybe the active job seeker market there.
Great.
The significant growth we've seen, though, is actually in those that actively applying. They do want to speak to expert team of recruiters.
You're cutting slightly. You're cutting out slightly.
At the moment, just because this. Sure. Okay.
Sorry, you're cutting
okay?
out slightly. I was just thinking, in terms of sort of, you mentioned the word sort of the confidence in the market. What would you say are the best ways to reach candidates right now at this time? What would you say are the key ways of how we can reach those people?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Dylan. The way we're seeing things, the changing landscape, I mean, we've been monitoring this for a while in terms of its transition from a almost a more desktop, a more offline way of applications. Over the last few years, it's been showing a serious trend towards mobile. In the last month, that's almost skyrocketed in terms of mobile traffic through Eteach, and that's gone from around 65% to 80% mobile candidates. So the explanation for this is candidates are at home, they're on their smartphones and devices, and they are browsing and looking at jobs. So again, one of the things that schools maybe should be aware of right now is, is my application form or method mobile friendly? And, how long is it taking candidates to do on mobile, if they can do it at all? So, one suggestion we always say is just think of this from a candidate perspective in any time. The other observation or opportunity right now with the change in candidate behaviour is that the pandemic is keeping people inside more. So we're definitely seeing that in the increase in social media presence and activity on social media. So, for example, we're looking at some statistics on Facebook. Is users are spending almost 12% more time on Facebook now in April than they were in March. So, this is a great opportunity to maybe test that out as an opportunity, a channel for attracting and engaging with candidates, pushing content through there. So checking that whatever system you're using has what we like to call a broadcast feature, so enabling you to push your jobs instantly across social media is a really important thing right now.
So in many ways, when we talk about what schools can do right now, if you've got that facility that you just mentioned, that functionality to post a job, ensure that you are using your social media channels, because that's where the market ultimately is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Dylan. It's you've got to react and be prepared to change your strategies when different situations arise. And in terms of what we're finding with schools is that actually, we're hearing one of two situations. There are some schools, that are almost taking the batten down the hatches approach and ride out the storm. The other scenario we're seeing is that there are schools that are looking to adapt and overcome. They're seeing new opportunities for education and how they're conveying content to parents, pupils, etc. And we're finding it really refreshing working with those schools as well and actually learning off them. And what we're seeing, hiring now is definitely different, but it's not impossible. And looking forward to September is something I think schools should all have and be preparing for. We don't want a mad rush, when September starts to try and recruit. So the sooner you can start to do it, the better. As I mentioned before, there is, an enlarged amount of passive job seekers in the market right now. So if you do have access, and actually many of the Eteach customers watching right now will have access to their regional talent pool, it would be a great option there just to go through and directly contact individuals in there about any opportunities you've got, because they're much more receptive to being contacted right now. So you should get a lot better results if you try that. For those that do it, if you do have access to any other database or a talent pool of your own, definitely now's the time to start contacting them. In terms of coordination, and it can be very hard, obviously working remotely, to stay in contact with your team, so your hiring team, or again, those that are going to be involved in the process. So looking at an online system or an applicant tracking system, if you don't have one right now, would be quite a useful activity. Just enables you to have a clear overview, a single centralized space for managing those candidates and managing your recruitment. Is paying off for a lot of our members at the moment that are using the school recruiter platform, just coordinating all of that. A few other things we're seeing just a few other things we're seeing is that a growth in sort of video interviewing software, and looking at different ways of, again, assessing candidates. So maybe have a consider any of those. And I think one of the most important things is remaining in contact with candidates. These times of uncertainty can cause candidates to drop out, and not to mention, because they've got way more time at the moment on their hands, in a lot of cases, they can apply for other jobs. So if you're not contacting and not staying in close, continuous contact and engaging these candidates, then you might lose applicants for your positions. So increase communication, nurture and engage with the candidates. And finally, you can do this through your career sites or any vacancies page you've got. Utilize that to show how you're adapting to the crisis, to the challenge. Put up pictures of online lessons, show work that's been completed remotely from children at home, any staff engagement or motivation you're doing, like quizzes or, again, socials that everyone can do online. All this shows your school as a really forward-thinking place, and a really attractive environment for candidates. So those are sort of a short list of things that I suggest from a recruitment and a candidate attraction perspective that schools could adopt right now.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Rhys. I mean, the summary on that is, you could say that the more innovative that we are, embracing the new technologies out there that we have, whether it's Zoom or any of the other things that you said, using your application ATS system rather, with all the features and benefits, there is a really good chance you'll build up that reach and ultimately, maintain that brand with your contacts. But that's brilliant. I mean, just to sort of point out to the people who are listening to this, I forgot to mention we are recording this. So what we will do is, at the end of this, we will send you a recording of this webinar. So if there's anything that you missed, you'll have the opportunity to play this back. So that's just outstanding. Thank you so much for that. So if I can now turn to Tony Makowski and Eamon Whelan. So obviously this is where we received some questions prior to this, and I'm now just going to sort of ask Tony and Eamon now just to sort of take the lead on this one and just start talking through some of those questions, reminding ourselves of what those questions are, and how best to address some of those things that the schools can now start putting into place. So over to you, Tony.
Thanks very much, Dylan. Good afternoon. To those school leaders out there coping with this pandemic, thank you very much for handling it so well. I trust you are, particularly with regards to staff, students, parents, and the schools themselves. It's a tough job. We appreciate it. My name is Tony Markowski. I'm one of two partners at Yearwood Education, which is a schools advisory company which is based in London but works nationally with occasional international work. We specialise in head teacher and SLT coaching, governance development, teaching improvement programs, recruitment, change management, organisational development, and quality assurance. We've teamed up with Eteach today at their request to offer support to schools in any way we can through this format, and we're very happy during the pandemic to offer our services pro bono to schools who wish to get in touch. Eamon, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be voice only, but as Tony said, well done to the leaders out there. Possibly the most challenging times in our professional careers, I would suggest, fraught with issues. So well done, and keep going. tough times. What Tony and I are not going to do is we're not compliance managers. We're not going to patronize you by going through all the regulations, because there's a plethora of information out there. You as heads and leaders will know where it is, unions, government, social media, etc. We particularly like the Jeff Barton stuff and Askell's work. So I know many of you may be members already, but that's very good. And his daily updates we found to be very, very, very useful for us. So I just share that with you. In terms of Tony and I, we're members of the Association of Education Advisors. We came across it 3 years ago after careers in leadership, and we really highly recommend the association. They train advisors. We've been through the process and some really good stuff. And the reason I'm flagging that up to you is they have a whole range of support that's available to them, which we can access. And Tony and I are more than happy to offer that to you. It can be personal, legal, financial, staffing, and so on. So please feel free, give us the ring, contact us through the website, www.yearwoodeducation.co.uk. Even if it's a chat, if you're a lonely leader. So hopefully this next section will be about common sense, not about compliance. Tony, what's the first big issue we've been picking up on?
Right, so we're responding to the questions we've had coming in. The first one we're going to deal with this afternoon. As the return to school starts to be talked about in the press, what are the issues facing heads? Well, on Sunday, Gavin Williamson talked about the flattening of the curve, of course, but he also mentioned a regionalised approach, suggesting that London and Birmingham might be the last places to be going back because they are the ones worst hit by the pandemic, but suggesting that schools in other parts of the country might open a little earlier. He reinforced the fact that it would have to be in tandem with the rest of the economy. So, from our point of view, we think heads ought to be prepared for an imminent return. Once government starts leaking to the newspapers that there are going to be things happening in the next 3 weeks, they possibly don't mean that, but we should be taking it seriously. 3 weeks, I doubt it. That certainly wouldn't be popular with the heads I've spoken to, but after the half term seems pretty likely, at least in part. What does that mean? Well, as you're well aware, the exam classes years 10 and 12 in current year 10 and lower 6 have missed out a chunk of their education, and so I presume those are the first people in secondary school will be going back. But of course, primary schools will have to be making some arrangements too. What would I counsel heads to be doing? I think I would be making sure that you communicate very clearly, even though you don't know precisely what's going to be happening. It's okay to be unclear. The world is. But it's not okay to fail to communicate with your staff. If it's in a small school, perhaps individually. If it's in a bigger school, perhaps by weekly briefings, which I know many of you are involved with. Another one of the issues that's come up is the potential summer holiday school that again has been muted, particularly by those outside education, I imagine. It's an issue because it's going to be presuming that heads and others, mainly senior staff who've been in all the time already during this crisis, will continue to do so and work with students. So there are some other issues that have come up in the last few weeks. Year 7 placements have been sent out to parents, of course, and in some areas of England and Wales, that isn't too controversial. In areas of London, though, 30% of parents haven't received their first choice. And of course, the appeals process has to go on, irrespective of the pandemic. So we've got to make sure that there are robust processes for that. And at the other end of the scale, what about at the beginning of primary school, at nursery level? It's all very well talking about social distancing and isolating, but when you take little ones into school, how the heck are we going to apply those sort of distancing rules with pupils of that age group? How many pupils can your school safely facilitate? Should children from medically vulnerable households return to school at all during this time? Is social distancing, the deep cleaning of schools, PPE for staff, something that we should be dealing with as leaders in education? Or are teachers being treated as economic pawns while the country tries to get itself back together? Finally, from me on this question, how should heads lead in these circumstances? It's a tough one, but one we should be discussing both among ourselves and with our respective unions. Thanks very much. Eamon, what's the next subject?
Well, Tony, essentially it's well-being, and I'm going to start with leaders. And I've mentioned the difficulty of lonely leadership, but we're all very concerned about leaders who, in this period of confusion and ambiguity and uncertainty, it's a nightmare. So support for leaders, first of all, we think is critical. And you as leaders think about how you access that, who your support is. And often in a very condensed family environment or at home, it's very difficult. And if you're a leader who's at home on your own, you need to think about using the support structures that are available for yourself and all the other tips for healthy living around exercise and diet, etc. So that's a very live issue that we've got for leadership. And of course, leaders' responsibility for other staff and their well-being is a massive area. We do that all the time as leaders, but now, you know, we're thinking about the car crash of re-entry and social distancing. It's evident you'll need to have a very clear plan, legally supported, based on best practice. So seek advice, get together on a very clear social distancing plan. Don't put yourself at risk. Other best practice is pretty common sense, you know, reassurance for staff about their safety on re-entry, which means excellent systems for formal and informal communication with staff, with colleagues, and how you think about how you do that. And I would say that staff who are at risk, either living alone or have vulnerable people in their household, I would have a spreadsheet and some clear information about that, and about maybe signposting where they can get support. Agree ways of working and how different people work. And clearly you want to, we're pretty short term at the moment. What can realistically be achieved during this period? I think developing and maintaining trust with your staff is really important, and how you do that is something you may want to think about, right down to equipment, IT support, one-to-one support. But essentially, I would say at this time as a leader, feedback, communicate, and praise as much as you can within this difficult period. Tony, what's next?
We had a look, we got some questions about online resources and so on and so forth. As we're all keenly aware, the students who are at the greatest disadvantage at the start of this process will continue to be at a disadvantage. And although Gavin Williamson promised laptops and so on to schools, the guidance as to the way to get that isn't clear. In speaking to heads in the last day and a half about this topic, I know many of them have put aside some money in the budget and are simply going out, buying the resources, buying the laptops with a dongle, even taking chairs and exam desks round to the houses of the disadvantaged who stereotypically, excuse me, don't have anywhere to study, to making sure that they have the opportunity of keeping up with their studies. One of the statistics that came back to me today was that 40% of students are not engaging in online lessons. Many of those will be the disadvantaged. Another criticism, and this is specifically at England, bizarrely in the UK, we are the least well organised for ed tech. Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales have a much better system. And it's something that we really ought to lobby government about in future, because wouldn't it have been great if there'd been a really robust EdTech hub available to schools now? But what is there out there? Well, you're very well aware as heads of the tons of offers that are out there, but I'll talk about one or two that have come online recently. As you'll be aware, I think, on Monday, the Oak National Academy opened, and they offer 180 one-hour-long lessons each week, going from primary right through to year 10. I'm going to acknowledge a bit of bias here. I know Ed Vainker, who's the executive head at the Reach Academy, who started this process. He started a school with about a dozen kids in Feltham, one of the socio-economically most deprived areas in London. And he's done a fantastic job in building up a really innovative school there. I also happen to know one of the teachers, one of the 40 teachers who is delivering the lessons, a girl, I say, a woman called Francesca Reed, who was born about 100 yards from where I'm sitting now. She's the daughter of a neighbour of ours, fantastic teacher. And she's one of those young people that you would want teaching your own kids. So real bias about what they have done there, and the fact that they've set it up in very short order, I'm very impressed by. I've also been reading some stuff internationally. A chap called Darren Lyon is the head of AGS Muscat, and they are ahead of us in terms of technology and using online learning, so that's worth having a look at. New bite-sized daily started on Monday as well, BBC, and of course there are lots of materials produced by the Beeb. Even Amazon are giving away free gifts with their audio books. Joe Wicks, who you may have been already copying on your TV screens, as he encourages you to do your PE exercises at home. Joe Wicks is really doing a good job with his online resources, and they're very well worth getting into. DFE resources are out there aplenty, and they're really, really good. Just log on to www.gov.uk if you want to start finding that. Finally, on this one, really, I could talk for ages about it. How about looking at Mumsnet? There's an unofficial little source of information, and many of our parents will no doubt touch base with that. There's also Pearson Education, but the last thing on this, we need to educate our parents about keeping children safe online. It's a perfect time for people to take advantage of children, and it's essential that schools take responsibility for sending that information out to the parents. Eamon, what's next?
Could I just quickly interrupt, guys? Just to speak to, obviously, the participants. We haven't received any questions yet. So you do have a facility on the drop down over on the right-hand side of questions. If you want to start sending them through, remember we're going to have maybe 5 minutes towards the end to address any questions that are being thought of whilst Tony and Eamon are thinking. But until then, I'll hand back to Eamon.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Well, the issues that heads have always had, leaders have always had, remain the same: recruitment and finance. I won't go through all the financial stuff with you, but what we've picked up on, there are some additional pots of money available. There's a catch-up premium coming out to help vulnerable and disadvantaged pupils when the schools reopen, which the Minister, Robert Halfon, is announcing, or may have announced already. They're looking at £700 per pupil. You know about support for free school meals. You'll know about the controversy around the voucher system, which I won't go into now. There are additional funds for cleaning and maintaining schools. And we found that for schools that cannot meet all their issues through the existing budgets, there is a DFE coronavirus helpline when you can possibly get some money. Tony?
Thanks very much, Eamon. One of the topics that came up, and we'll deal with it very briefly because I think we're almost behind the game on this, is about furloughing staff. It might apply more to the private sector and state boarding schools who had to furlough staff non-teaching staff in the main, there's some very good practice around this. I know it doesn't apply to most contexts in the state sector, but there's some very good practice I saw, which I will share with you very briefly. There's HMRC advice about this, of course, but one of the schools we deal with has had to furlough staff because they are a business. And if they don't have enough funds coming in, they will go under. And that is a real stress on the private sector, as you can imagine. What this particular school has done is it's had the middle managers work with SLT to choose who should properly go into furlough. They've then negotiated that furlough condition with the individual members of staff, and they have kept a special communication open with those furloughed staff. They expected it to be for 3 weeks in the first instance, but as conditions change, they are communicating that it might be another 3 weeks and so on. But they've promised those staff that they'll be taken back on when the school term reopens. In the state sector, it's typically been, as I said, in the boarding school settings, but also with schools that outsource particular things. Sports coaches was one example that came up. Eamon, over to you.
Well, the last one from me, Tony, heads are, although this webinar is predominantly about staff and recruitment, they're very worried about their vulnerable students. And you know, we know the facts, don't we? When this all started, around 60,000 vulnerable students attended, and not long afterwards that had reduced to 29,000. At the start, there were 85,000 children of critical care workers. By last Friday, their numbers had dropped to 62, and only 2% of all children of critical workers are going to school. We also know that child protection referrals have dropped by as much as 75%. And I think our moral imperative, number one priority, is the health and safety of our staff and students. And so keep a very close eye on your safeguarding and support for vulnerable students. Deploy your staff appropriately. You'll have systems and structures in place already, but you know, make sure you offer links to all the relevant health and wellbeing support. There's loads out there, and people have got time. So just make sure you've got that mapped in some way as a head. Don't have to do it yourself. Clearly connecting families to support mechanisms, whether it be Samaritans, Childline, etc., and how you do it. And just have a little look at your safeguarding policy and make sure you've got something about hidden vulnerabilities and who's doing what to help those particular students. Tony, we've got a few questions, I think, that came in. Do you think you've covered them, or do you want to cover them now?
There's one, Eamon, that came in last night, and I needed some help with this. So I contacted 10 head colleagues, and the question was, what happens with performance management? Should we pass everyone, given that they've not managed to complete some of their targets? So I've tried to summarize the head's returns. One of them, bless him, he's off my Christmas card list, came on slightly after we started, so I'll have words with him next time I catch him up for a pint. So essentially, there's a mixed bag of practice out there. The 10 heads came in with 10 different practices, but essentially, they all say we can't carry on as we did before. We cannot ignore COVID, as is obvious. This is the first thing I'd like to share with you. Now, I haven't had time to follow up on it in any great way, but it said, this is from one of my head colleagues, as per DfE guidance, this year's results cannot be used for pay purposes or any other reason. We will therefore not be using performance management information garnered in the year. I suspect that for this year, the governors will apply pay awards across the board without recourse to exam data. So I thought I'd share that with you. I haven't yet put my finger on that specific DfE guidance. Somebody might be able to help us out there. Many of the other heads said we're going to continue with our practice, but we're going to take into account, of course, the impossibility of meeting some of the targets. For example, we know that there won't be public exams. We know that some staff won't have been in school for a significant chunk of the spring term, and therefore the summer term, sorry, and therefore won't be able to have completed some of the targets which relied on them being there. But I'll finish this because I know we're running short of time, because there was one particular head whose guidance I was very struck by, and it's, excuse me if I'm looking to read this off my notes, came in quite late. He says, my final thoughts would be to advise schools talking about this to consider the very purpose of their performance management process and whether it is genuinely supporting school improvement objectives. The process will be very limited this year for most schools. And what impact will that really have? He puts a caveat in there, unless you're dealing with seriously underperforming staff, which you can't avoid. And in another paragraph, final point from me, he said, it's time to be kind. There you go. Eamon, those are my questions done.
Thank you, Tony. Dylan, I think it's back to you and Reese.
Yep, absolutely fine. Well, look, that was just outstanding. Thank you so much, Tony and Eamon. So in just summarising some of those points, using some of the active words that Tony and Eamon were using, my takeaways was sort of communication, communicate with your staff, support your staff, praise your staff, be prepared for an early return date. I mean, we are hearing lots of things in the news, but it was really interesting insight there from Tony that it might be longer, but still be prepared. Safeguarding. Think about what those policies are saying at the moment. Time to be kind. And I can definitely concur that bite-size daily is amazing. I have 2 children. They've been using it. They perhaps haven't been engaging with education during this lockdown, but I have got 2 very engaged children buying into that. So I can definitely say that the bite-size daily is something really to take on. So the great news is, in just prompting the participants, we do actually have a question that's come through. It is just the one question. So I'm going to put this out there to Reese, Tony, and Eamon. So the question is, how are leaders managing workload for teachers with young families with other responsibilities? Should teachers step in, or is it fairer to lower the workload expectation? So I'll repeat that again. How are leaders managing workload for teachers with young families and or other responsibilities? Should other teachers step in, or is it fairer to lower the workload expectation? Who would like to answer that question?
Well, may I jump in there?
Go on, Eamon.
Well, I would just say that a good head will know their staff and will formally or informally have a risk assessment, probably best informally, of each individual member of staff, and whether they are vulnerable. And you can be vulnerable as a parent. You can be a lonely parent, you can be an overstretched parent. So I think a reasonable response, a flexible response, which doesn't overburden others, but and protects people with caring responsibilities, is the way forward. There is no stock answer to it. There is no formula, but I think it's a combination of common sense, care, and kindness. But unless you've got some information, unless you've communicated with those staff and found out about their life outside of work, it's going to be very hard for you to make that risk assessment in the first place. So that regular contact with staff, particularly the quiet staff. Tony and I do a lot of work with women in leadership, and what we find is that they juggle 10 balls in the air and it's too much, but they cope. And my question would be, how many women like that have you got, or lone parents? And What adjustments are you making to support them?
Great, that's brilliant.
I think that's really good, Eamon. The consideration doesn't stop during COVID. How are we going to manage the tension that teacher parents who are dealing with their own vulnerable children or extended families who live in the same home? How are we going to deal with that when they're expected to come back to work and they have to be isolated or they have responsibilities outside their professional load?
Superb.
Thank you.
That's great. Excellent. I haven't got any more questions, but what I'm going to do, when I say any more questions, we haven't received any more questions from the participants. But what I am going to do is I'm just going to just show you a slide that should be appearing. Hopefully you can all see that. So if you want to get in touch with Eteach, you can see those details there. So that's how you get in touch with Eteach. If you want to email Reese, you can see his email address there. I will obviously send these slides out. And then likewise, you should be able to see the, let me just pop. You should be able to see the information if you wish to contact either Tony. So I'm just going to move my screen around. So you can see you've got Tony and Eamon's mobile telephone numbers there, and you've also got their email addresses. So if I could just take this opportunity just to thank everyone in attending. As I said, we will be in touch with a recording, and we will also be in touch with our webinar series, which is centering all around the lockdown. And at this early stage, we're thinking that we might be doing a follow-up next week. That is yet to be confirmed. So if anyone does have any further questions, we'd be more than happy to continue this conversation on, but that is yet to be decided. But all being well, we will be in touch with an update to that. So if I can just go back to the panel, and before I thank them for being available today, do Reese, Tony, and or Eamon have any final points before we end the webinar?
Don't be a lonely leader. Seek help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're lonely, upset, worried, reach out. There are people out there who can help you. You're not isolated on your own. It's one of the toughest jobs in the world, being a leader in a school. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I would just echo that as well from Eamon and from the Eteach team. Obviously, we are here for absolutely any sort of advice around the recruitment and hiring process that schools might want to ask. Obviously, no obligation, completely free advice. Please get in touch if you do need to find out anything or ask for help.
That's brilliant. Well, look, thank you ever so much for everyone attending today. Thank you to our speakers, Tony, Eamon and Reese. And as I said, we will be in touch with an update and details on how you can sign up to our next webinar. But until then, thank you ever so much for attending, and goodbye.
Thank you.